The sand around Site 40 had turned a strange color over the years, not from the crash. That was old news. It had turned dark because of the oil, the coolant, the chemicals that leaked out of the alien hull every time the temperature dropped at night. Researchers had stopped trying to clean it. They just wore boots with thick soles and kept working. Dra-O had been at Site 40 for 4 years. She had come as a junior drive systems analyst from the University of Cape Town, sent by a consortium that was still arguing over who officially owned the wreck. She had never left. Nobody who stayed long enough ever really left. It was 2:00, the morning when she found the pulse. She was not looking for it. She had her arms inside a secondary drive housing, trying to trace a power line that kept disappearing on the scanner. The line was not broken. It was not disconnected. It was simply going somewhere the scanner refused to follow. She had been chasing it for 3 nights. On the 4th night, with her cheek pressed against the warm inner wall of the housing and her fingers brushing something that felt more like tendon than wire, the ship hummed, not a mechanical hum, not a vibration from settling metal, something lower than that, something that moved through her teeth. She pulled her hand back slowly. The hum stopped. She put her hand back in. It started again. She stayed like that for a long time. 7 years ago, Vrathi vessel had appeared in low orbit without warning. It was not the first time an alien ship had passed through the solar system. There had been 2 confirmed transit events in the decade before, but it was the first time one had stopped. Ground stations tracked it for 9 hours. It did not respond to any signal. It did not deploy anything. It did not appear to be scanning. Then it dropped, not like a controlled descent, like something set down and let go. The ship hit the upper atmosphere at the wrong angle, shed pieces of its outer hull in streaks of blue-white light, and came down hard in the Namib, 300 km from the nearest town. The impact cracked the ground for 2 km in every direction, but did not explode. The ship was intact, enough that you could still tell what it was. The only transmission the Vrathi vessel had sent before releasing it was a short automated message received by 17 different monitoring stations simultaneously. Translated, it said, property forfeited, salvage risk classified, terminal, no recovery recommended. That was it. No explanation, no warning, no apology. Earth governments argued for 2 years about what to do with it. Scientists argued for 3 more. By the time the International Site 40 team had proper funding and proper access, the ship had been sitting in the desert for 5 years, slowly being covered by wind-blown sand on one side and slowly refusing to be covered on the other, as if it was still trying to orient itself. Rika Tanaka arrived on a Tuesday with a military case, a bad attitude about the heat, and a directive from Earth Defense Command that he handed to Dar without saying good morning first. She read it while he poured water from her kettle without asking. The directive was short. Site 40 was to be assessed for operational capability within 60 days. All research goals were being reclassified under defense priority. All team members were to be considered active consultants under EDC authority until further notice. Dara looked up what is coming. RKU sat down on a crate of diagnostic equipment. He was a weapons integration specialist. She had worked with him twice before on Smaller projects, and she had always found him difficult to read, not cold, just economical. He did not say things until he meant them. He said drove an advanced scout's outer system past the helipause 4 days ago. She had heard the name. Everyone working in Xenotech had heard the name. The Droven were the reason the Vrathi had warships. They were the reason a lot of species had warships. How long, she asked. Best estimate 62. 90 days before any leading element reaches inner system range. She looked back at the ship from where she sat. She could see the main hull through the open wall of the research bay, a long, dark shape that caught the floodlights and threw them back at odd angles. It was not beautiful exactly, but it was not ugly either. It was shaped like something that had been grown rather than built. All curves and ridges, no sharp lines except where pieces had broken off during the descent. We don't even know if it can fly, she said. Can it be made to fly? She thought about the pulse, the way the hum had started when she touched the right place, the way the power line on her scanner had not been missing, just going somewhere it chose not to show her yet. I think it wants to, she said. Riku finished his water. Then that's enough for now. Outside, the desert was quiet and enormous and dark. The ship sat in the middle of it like a sleeping thing. Dra walked back to the drive housing, put her hand inside, and felt the hum start again before her fingers even reached the wall. She decided to call it Namo. It was an old word. It meant sea. She had no good reason for it except that the ship felt deep in a way she could not explain, and deep things needed names that fit them. She got back to work. Priere had a habit of talking to things that could not talk back. Plants broken, instruments, her car on cold mornings. Her colleagues at Site 40 had learned not to comment on it. When Priya talked to the ship, she took notes. She had been the team's xenolinguist for 3 years before anyone took her seriously about the biological components. The Vratha used a design method that had no equivalent in human engineering. Their ships were not assembled, they were cultivated. The hull plating had a cellular structure. The conduit pathways behaved like capillaries. The drive core, when sectioned and examined under magnification, looked unsettlingly like a cross-section of a brain. Nobody wanted to say that out loud. Priya said it on day 9 and put it in the official report. After that, people started listening to her differently. The ship was not alive in the way a person was alive. It did not have a face or a voice or needs that anyone could point to directly, but it had responses. Touch the wrong conduit the wrong way, and nearby panels would heat up, not to burning, just to warm, like a hand placed over something it did not want you to reach. Work steadily on a section for long enough, and the material around it would begin to soften slightly, making the work easier. It was cooperation so subtle that 3 different team members had filed it as equipment anomaly before Priya convinced them to file it as behavior instead. The language question had taken longer. Vrathi written language was not alphabetic, it was structural. Meaning was carried by shape and relationship between shapes, not by sequence. Priya had spent 14 months on it before she could read basic operational labels. Another 8 before she could read the ship's internal logs. The logs were where she found the reason the ship had been abandoned. She read them alone at night because she needed to be sure before she told anyone Else, the Wrath crew had been a complement of 9. Their mission, as recorded in the ship's own memory, had been defensive, a patrol route through a contested zone where drove incursions had been increasing. Standard assignment, nothing unusual in the first 40 hours of the log. Then the orders changed. A Wratha colony station in the zone had been identified as a potential drove resupply point, not confirmed. Identified as potential, the new orders directed the ship to perform a full suppression strike on the station. The station had a registered civilian population of 4,000. The crew debated, the log recorded it, all with the flat precision of a system that did not understand what it was watching. Arguments, counter-arguments. 2 crew members voted to comply, 6 voted to refuse, 1 abstained. The captain sent the compliance signal. Anyway, the ship did not comply. It locked out every crew interface, vented the command spaces of atmosphere for 30 seconds, long enough to make the point, and then restored pressure and held position. It transmitted a refusal code that Priya, after 3 weeks of careful translation, confirmed was something close to action outside sanctioned parameters. Crew authority suspended, awaiting legitimate command input. No legitimate command input came. The Wrathi Council, rather than investigate, classified the incident and marked the vessel as malfunctioning, dangerous, liability. They moved it to the edge of a disposal orbit and eventually quietly let it fall. They had not told it why. They had just let it go. Dara read the translated logs twice without saying anything. Then she set them down and walked to the hull and pressed her palm flat against it the way she had been doing for weeks now, waiting for the hum. It came immediately. You knew, she said quietly, you knew what they were going to do, and you stopped them. She was not expecting an answer. She got one anyway, not words. But the hull under her palm grew slightly warmer, the way it did when she had been working a long time in one spot, and the ship had decided to help. Riku had read the logs by then. He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, doing the thing he did when he was recalculating something. So the ship is not broken, he said. Never was, Priya said from the other side of the bay, not looking up from her workstation. The Wrathi told the whole galaxy it was a malfunctioning wreck. He paused, because admitting what actually happened would mean admitting what they tried to do. Yes, Priya said. Riku was quiet for a moment, then he said, that is a thing worth being angry about. It is, Dara said. Her hand was still on the hull, but right now I'm more interested in the fact that it let us in. We came here curious. We came here with tools, not weapons. We asked it questions instead of giving it orders. She turned around. It has been choosing us this whole time. We just did not notice. Priya finally looked up. I think it noticed us, though. Outside the bay, the desert wind moved through the scaffolding with a low sound that was almost not quite a hum. There was a lot of work still to do, but something had shifted. Not in the ship, which had apparently always known exactly what it was. Something had shifted in the people working on it. They stopped treating it like a project. They started treating it like an agreement. Gree watched all of this through a sensor drone no larger than a beetle parked on a strut above Dara's head, and sent his report to the Wratha Council with a note they would choose to ignore. These humans are not salvaging the vessel, they are earning it. On day 1 of the countdown, RKU discovered that Namu's primary weapons array used a targeting system based on something that had no equivalent in human technology. It did not lock onto a target by tracking heat or mass or electromagnetic signature. It identified intent. He stared at the translated readout for a long time. Then he called Priya over and asked her to check his translation. She checked it. That says intent. She confirmed. How does a weapon lock onto intent? I don't know, asked Namu. He looked at the hull. The hull gave off a faint, warm light, the way it had started doing when the team worked late. He decided to treat it as an engineering problem and moved on. By day 8 he had figured out part of it. The array did not track the target itself. It tracked behavior, patterns in the surrounding space, thrust vectors, power fluctuations, the geometry of approach. From those patterns it built a probability model of what the target intended to do in the next several seconds and aimed at where the target was going to be, not where it was. It was less like a gun and more like a conversation the ship was having with physics. RKU spent 2 days writing interface code that could translate human targeting inputs into something Namu would accept. On the second day he fell asleep at his desk. When he woke up, the code had 3 new lines in it that he had not written. They were better than his lines. He did not tell anyone about that for a week. The team ran on short sleep and long hours and a shared understanding that there was no version of this where they got more time. Draw organized work into shifts. But nobody fully respected the shifts because there was always one more thing to check, one more system to test, one more place where Namu had quietly rearranged something overnight, and they needed to figure out what it meant. The ship was helping. That was the only word for it. Panels that had been sealed for years began opening. Conduits that had been dead began carrying power again. Propulsion subsystem that the team had marked as unrovable on their 3rd week at Site 40 started showing green status indicators on day 19 without anyone touching it. Dara put her ear against the hull near that section and heard a steady rhythmic sound like the ship was breathing differently now. Deeper, more cert. Priya spent the middle weeks talking to Namu directly. She did not use the ship's interface terminals. Those were for data. She just talked out loud the way she always had with things she was trying to understand. She explained what the Droven were. She explained what they did to planets they reached. She described what Earth looked like from orbit. She had seen the images and described what it looked like from the ground too. The desert, the grass, the way the sky changed color at the edges when the sun was setting. On day 24, a section of hull near the bay entrance grew a pattern of faint lines that Priya did not recognize. She photographed it and spent a night comparing it to everything in the Vrath linguistic database. It was not a Vrathi form. It was not any form she had seen before. She eventually concluded it was something Namu had made up. The closest translation she could manage was something like, I remember this place now. She cried a little. She filed it as a behavioral notation and did not put the crying part in the report. Gree made contact on day 31. He appeared at the perimeter fence at night, which was either brave or very stupid, and asked the guard on duty to please tell Dr. N that an old friend from the Vrathi observation program would like to speak with her. He was not exactly old. He was young for a Vratha, which meant he looked about 40 by human. Reckoning, he had 4 arms and the careful eyes of someone who had been watching humans for long enough to be genuinely worried about them. Priya brought him inside. Dara and RKU were there within minutes. Gree did not waste time. He said the Vratha Council had been monitoring Site 40 since before the human team had arrived. He said hi. Speaker None had classified Namu's operational status as a political liability, and he said that if the Council confirmed the ship was functional, they would send a retrieval fleet, not to help, not to fight the Droven, to take Namu back and most likely dismantle it. The ship was an embarrassment. A working Namu was proof of what the Council had covered up. Destroyed Namu was just an old incident. No one could verify anymore. Riku said they would rather let Earth burn than let their own people know what they did. Gree did not deny it. He looked at the hall and said quietly, I have been watching this ship for 3 years. I have never seen it respond to Vrath personnel the way it responds to your team. I filed 12 reports saying so. None of them were acknowledged. He paused. I am telling you this because I think the ship deserves to fly, and I think you are the ones it has chosen to fly it. Dra looked at him for a long moment, then she looked at Namu. Then we need to win before they show up, she said. She went back to work. Grill stayed. Nobody told him to leave, and after a while he picked up a diagnostic tool and started helping without being asked. He was, it turned out, very good at xenobiology. The work went faster. After that, they did not come quietly. The Drove fleet dropped out of transit. Drive between Earth and the Moon in 17 vessels arranged in a wedge formation. That was not meant to look threatening. It was meant to look efficient. There was a difference. Threatening implied emotion. The Drove formation said simply, we have done this before. We know the fastest way, and we are not concerned about your response. Translated, it said, yield resource inventory or be cataloged for harvest. It repeated on a loop and did not wait for a reply because the Droven did not particularly need one. The reply would either be silence, which meant proceed, or weapons fire, which also meant proceed. Earth's orbital defense platforms engaged within 4 minutes. They were good platforms. Humanity had spent 2 decades building them after the first confirmed alien transit and 3 more decades improving them after the second. They hit 3 of the D-Ven vessels in the opening exchange and caused measurable damage to a 4th. The D-Ven adjusted and destroyed 6 of the 12 platforms in 90 seconds, not aggressively, efficiently. The way you clear debris from a path you intend to walk. Namu lifted from the NAMIB without ceremony. There was no countdown, no dramatic launch sequence. The landing struts, which the team had spent 11 days repairing and which Namu had quietly reinforced from the inside, simply retracted. The ship rose straight up through the heat shimmer of the desert afternoon and kept going. Inside it was quiet. The crew of 12 had their stations. Dra was in the command seat, which was not really a seat. It was more like a curved depression in a surface that had grown itself over 3 weeks to match the shape of her. Riku was at weapons. Priya was at communications, with a secondary station now showing Grell's work, a live translation layer, running Droven broadcast signals through everything they had learned about that language in the past month, which was Not much, but was more than nothing. Colonel Voss was on the ground channel. He said, "Namu, you are authorized to engage." Dara said understood. She did not. Tell him that authorization from the ground was not really how this worked. Anymore, Namu already knew where it was going. She was less a pilot and more a collaborator, someone who pointed at the problem and trusted the ship to solve it in a way that neither of them could have managed alone. The first contact with the Devenan fleet happened at close range by ship combat standards, which meant they could almost see each other clearly. Namu moved differently from anything the Deven targeting systems expected. Vrathi warships of this class were known quantities in Deven databases. Their speed, their turning radius, their weapon range, Namu matched none of those parameters anymore. 4 years of human modifications had changed the thrust geometry in ways that the original design had never intended. The ship was faster in short bursts. It turned on angles that should have been dangerous, but were not, because Namu had adjusted its own internal bracing without telling anyone. Riku fired the first shot. He used a targeting approach he had built himself, a hybrid of his human interface code and the 3 lines he had not written, the ones that had appeared in his system while he slept. The shot hit a Drovan vessel amidships and left a wound in the hull that glowed for several seconds before the emergency seals engaged. The Drovan targeted Namu. Their first volley missed. Their second clipped the upper hull and left a score that smoked but did not breach. The crew felt the impact as a low vibration, and the lights in the ship shifted briefly from white to deep amber before returning Namu's version of a sharp intake of breath. Then Namu did something RKU had not programmed. The weapons array shifted configuration. Mid-end engagement. 2 secondary emitters that had been showing as offline for weeks came online simultaneously, and the ship fired a pattern that RKU could not have designed because he had not known those emitters existed. The combined strike hit the drove and lead vessel at 3 points in a sequence timed to overlap their shield harmonics. The lead vessel went dark. Riku stared at his board. "That was not me," he said. "I know," Dara said. Priya was already logging it. She noted the timestamp and wrote Namu tactical initiative first. Confirmed instance. They took out 2 more drove vessels in the next engagement pass. 1 crew member, a propulsion technician named Sierra, was thrown against a bulkhead when the ship made an unannounced turn. She broke 2 ribs. The ship immediately RU'd power to warm her station and held the interior air pressure slightly higher than normal for the next hour, which was, according to Grell the Vrath, equivalent of offering someone a blanket. The Deven were slowing, not retreating. The Drovan did not retreat in the early stages of an engagement because their model did not include the concept of an underestimated opponent. They were recalculating. They had encountered this whole class before. They had records on it. None of the records matched what was happening. Then the Vrath fleet arrived. Priya heard them first, a tight beam signal on a Vrathi command frequency that Gree recognized immediately. She looked at Gree. He looked at Dar. High speaker Nan's voice filled the communications bay, speaking formal. Vratha. Priya translated without inflection. "This vessel is Vrathi property. You will power down and submit to council authority immediately." The Droven were still in front of them. The Vrathay fleet was behind them, and Namu, without waiting for anyone to say a word, held its position between both. Steady, unhurried, lit amber from within, like something that had already made up its mind. High Speaker Nan was not a patient man. He repeated the order 3 times before. Priya translated it, and 3 more times after, as if the problem was comprehension rather than refusal. Dara listened to all of it, then she opened a return channel and said in careful, simple words that Gree translated. For her, we are in the middle of an engagement. Contact us when the Divan have withdrawn. Nan's response was immediate and loud. Gree translated the key parts with the careful expression of someone diffusing something. The vessel was Vrath, property under Galactic Salvage Code. The humans had no legal standing. Their modifications to the ship were unauthorized. Their use of it was theft. If they did not comply, the Vrathay fleet would treat Namu as a hostile vessel and act accordingly. Riku, without looking away from his weapons board, said he is threatening to shoot the ship that is currently saving the planet he is parked behind. Yes, GR said. Is he aware of how that sounds? He is aware that it is legally consistent, which he considers more important. Dara closed the channel. She had 17 Droven vessels to deal with and a Vrath fleet that had not moved from its position at the edge of the engagement zone. She would handle Nan when there was time to handle him properly. Right now, Namu had work to do. Kessa had been junior diplomat on Nan's staff for 2 years. She had been assigned to the Earth mission because it was low priority work, the kind that did not advance careers and did not require strong opinions. She was developing strong opinions. She stood at the data station in the Vrathay command ship and watched the battle unfold in the tactical display. Namu moved through the drove in formation with a fluidity that Nova of its class should have had. It was not just the human modifications. She could see that from the performance data. It was something in the decision-making. The ship was choosing its engagements. It was protecting the orbital platforms that were still functioning. It was, as far as she could read the data, prioritizing the safety of things other than itself. She had read the standard briefings, malfunctioning warship, non-rovable salvage risk terminal. She had believed them because she had no reason not to. She believed them less with every pass Namu made across the tactical display. She was still watching when Gree's transmission arrived directly to her personal station, bypassing Nan's filters. She almost did not open it. She opened it. Inside was the full original log from Namu's abandonment. Not the classified summary, the raw record, the order to strike the civilian station, the crew vote, the captain's override, the ship's refusal, all of it, with timestamps and authentication codes that she checked 3 times because she needed to be sure she was sure. She walked to Nan and said quietly so the rest of the bridge would not hear, "Hi, Speaker, I need to show you something." He did not look away from the display. Later, it cannot wait. Everything can wait. The ship has not complied. We will move to collect it as soon as the drove engagement has concluded. She put it on the screen in front of him. He looked at it. His expression did not change in any way she could name, but something in the way he held himself changed, a slight stiffness, the posture of a person who has encountered a fact they have already decided not to accept. This is not current to this situation. He said it is current to the question of whether this vessel was legally abandoned, she said, and to the question of what we told the rest of the council. When we classified it, you will delete that transmission and return to your station. She did not delete it. She made 4 copies on separate storage systems first and then returned to her station and filed a formal record notation under her own credentials. In the engagement zone, the DVN were reassessing. They had lost 4 vessels. They had damaged 1. They had encountered a Vrathihol class that did not behave like a Vrathihol class, and a crew that did not behave like any crew. In their records, the DVN were not emotional about losses, they were mathematical about them. The calculation was shifting. Priya opened a channel to the Drovan fleet, not to the command vessel, to the whole fleet. Simultaneously, on the broadest signal Namu's communications array could manage. She had prepared it in secret, not certain it was a good idea, wanting it ready before she decided. She played Namu's original abandonment log, the civilian strike order, the refusal, all of it in Drovan broadcast format, not as an argument, just as information. The DVN respected data. They had come because their data called Earth an easy acquisition. She was offering updated data. The Drovan fleet held position for 47 seconds. Then the lead vessel, the replacement, since Namu had destroyed the first one, broadcast a single short signal. Gree translated it with an expression that was hard to read on a Vrathi face, but that Priya was beginning to recognize as surprise. It says, acquisition parameters no longer viable, withdrawing for recalculation. Riku leaned back in his seat. They are leaving because the math stopped working. Yes, Priya said. That, he said, is the least satisfying victory I have ever had. The DVN fleet turned and began to move away. Behind them, the Vrathi fleet had still not moved, and Kessa's formal record notation was at this moment being automatically distributed to every senior council member on the fleet, because that was what formal record notations did, and none had not realized she had filed one. The DVN left the way they came, efficiently, without drama, like water around a rock it has decided is not worth breaking. The display showed their fleet contracting into transit formation. Then they were gone, and the space between Earth and the Moon was quiet for the first time in 6 hours. Nobody celebrated, no noise, no cheering. Riku sat back in his seat and exhaled slowly. Priya pressed her forehead against the cool surface of her station. Dara watched the Vrathi fleet on the long-range display and said nothing, because the second problem was still there. Highspeaker Nan opened the channel without being invited. He was calmer now, which was somehow worse. Calm Nan was the version that had decided something. He said the engagement was concluded and the grounds for resistance no longer existed. The vessel would be powered down. The human crew would be removed. All modifications would be catalogued as unauthorized. There would be no punitive action if they complied within 10 minutes. Dura let the silence sit for a moment. Then she said, I would like to ask the ship something first. Nan said that the ship was a vessel and not a party to negotiations. Dra said, humor me. She turned away from the communications board and spoke out loud the way Priya had always done. In plain, simple words, she said, Namu, you heard all of that. Whatever you want to do, we will support it. If you want To go with them we will step off. If you do not tell us. The ship was quiet for 4 seconds, then it powered down, its weapons fully, not standby but cold. It retracted the external docking seals and it played back its own abandonment log through every open channel, simultaneously, without any filtering, without any translation omissions. At full signal strength, every ship in the Wrath fleet heard it, every monitoring station Earth had heard it. Every drove vessel still in transit range almost certainly received a copy, which Priya noted was a strategic decision she had not expected. Then Nama went still and waited on the Wrath command ship. Kessa's formal record notation had already reached 11 senior council members. 3 had responded. 2 of those responses were questions. 1 was a request for immediate verification. None was aware of all of this. Now his expression, Gree reported later, was that of someone watching a wall fall they had spent years insisting was solid. Kessa walked to the center of the command bridge and invoked Vrathi salvage code Section 12 formally and out loud, which meant it was on record and could not be unrecorded. Section 12 covered vessels that had refused their crew and been accepted by a new operator. It was an old provision written for drifting unmanned hulks. It had never been applied to a vessel with awareness. The legal argument was simple. The ship had refused its crew. The ship had been abandoned. The ship had accepted new operators of its own behavior. The 7-year period of continuous human operation exceeded the code's threshold for establishment of new custodianship. Under Vrathi law, their own law, Namu belonged to Earth. Nan said the law did not contemplate a vessel with awareness making its own choices. Kessa said with the precision of someone who had spent 2 weeks preparing this exact response, that the law did not exclude it either, and that in ambiguous matters Vrathi code defaulted to the interpretation most protective of the vessel, meaning the interpretation the vessel itself had chosen. The council members who had received her notation were by now very much paying attention. None was overruled, not shouted down, not overpowered, overruled by the law he had cited when he thought it would work in his favor. It was, Riku said later, a very satisfying kind of justice, the kind that uses someone's own weapon against them. Gree requested asylum on Earth before the diplomatic channels had fully cooled. Dra approved it personally, which she was not sure she had the authority to do, but nobody argued with her, and it seemed to stand. Kessa opened formal diplomatic contact 2 days later, not from a position of superiority, not with conditions. She opened it carefully with the understanding that the other side had every reason to be cautious. The talks were slow. They were supposed to be slow. There was a great deal to discuss. 3 weeks after the drove and withdrew, Dara went back to Namu alone. The crew was on rotation leave. The ship was parked in the Namib again, partly by habit, partly because it had returned there on its own, as if the desert was where it rested. She walked to the core room and sat down on the floor with her back against the hull. No tools, no checklist, no reason except that she wanted to be. The ship hummed low and steady the way it always did when she was the only person inside it. She did not say anything. The ship did not do anything. They just stayed together in the quiet, in the dark that was not really dark because the hull gave off its soft amber light, and the desert Outside was enormous and still, and the stars above were full of things that had learned at some cost that Earth was not. Empty and not alone, Riku found her, asleep against the hull an hour later. He stood in the doorway for